Hi, Attorney Chris Reich with Traffic Law Guys here, and in this video I wanted to talk a little bit about what reckless driving means in Arizona. Reckless driving feels like one of those statutes that's a little bit open-ended. First I want to read the statute, and then we'll talk about exactly what it means. The reckless driving statute reads, "A person who drives a vehicle in reckless disregard for the safety of person or property is guilty of reckless driving." So what does this mean? A person or property is pretty straightforward, but what does reckless disregard mean? And for that, I want to look at the jury instruction that's given in a reckless driving trial. So reckless driving is a jury eligible charge. Most criminal traffic charges are not jury eligible. It means there's going to be a bench trial. That means it's a trial in front of a judge, and the judge makes the decision guilty or not guilty. Very few criminal driving violations are jury eligible. DUI is one of them. Reckless driving is another. So with reckless driving, you can choose to have a trial in front of a judge, or you can choose to have a trial in front of 6 jury members. Now, in your jury trial, there are going to be instructions given to the jury about what they're supposed to be looking for. And one of these is going to be a definition of what does it mean to drive with reckless disregard. And so here I'm going to read the jury instruction, then we'll talk about it. The jury instruction is this: reckless disregard means that a defendant is aware of and consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that conduct will result in injury to a person or property. The risk must be of such a nature and degree that disregarding it is a gross deviation from what a reasonable person would do in the situation. So the question here is, what is a reasonable person? Because if we're basing reckless disregard for the safety of person or property, and that's based on what would a reasonable person do under the circumstances, we have to talk a little bit about what is the reasonable person. I'm going to read you another definition here about the reasonable person. A reasonable person is a fictional person with an ordinary degree of reason, prudence, care, foresight, or intelligence whose conduct, conclusion, or expectation in relation to a particular circumstance or fact is used as an objective standard by which to measure or determine something. I don't know that that's helpful, but a reasonable person standard might be kind of what's the normal person, how would they respond in that situation. So in a reckless driving situation, we're usually looking at a fact pattern where a person is maybe traveling at a very high rate of speed, maybe following too closely and tailgating, maybe they're changing lanes left and right. Essentially the allegation is they're engaging in some driving that a reasonable person, an ordinary person of standard care, your ordinary driver, would find dangerous. It would find that it's likely to result in some harm to person or property. Essentially, the person who's engaged in the reckless driving should have known better. That's the idea here. But as you can gather, reckless driving is not a very clear standard, I don't think, to most people. Something like criminal speeding, that's very clear. Was the driver traveling at more than 20 miles per hour over the speed limit? That's a very clear thing to talk about. But reckless disregard for the safety of people and property is pretty open-ended. And we see this applied in a variety of different circumstances. It could just be somebody driving on the highway at a high rate of speed by themselves with no other cars around. Theoretically, they're posing a danger to themselves or their car, so that's your person or property. A more appropriate case is probably somebody, say, who's traveling at 120 miles an hour on the highway, and there's a lot of other cars around going like 70 miles an hour, and the person going 120 is weaving in and out of traffic, making really tight lane changes, and tailgating people, and kind of really creating a hazard on the road. That's probably a more appropriate charge of reckless driving. Some of these are going to be easier to defend than others. So one that's just based strictly on speed, probably going to have a better opportunity of improving on that outcome. If the person's engaged in some really egregious driving, that's going to be more difficult. So as you might imagine, reckless driving cases are going to depend a lot on the specific facts of the case, and it's probably something worthwhile at least having a conversation with an attorney about to kind of figure out what makes sense on how to proceed in a reckless driving case.